Welcome back. The panel needs no introduction, but I'm going to do a brief one anyways. Owen Paterson is Conservative MP for North Shropshire, former Northern Ireland Secretary, former Environment Secretary in David Cameron's cabinet. Liam Byrne is Labour MP for Birmingham Hodge Hill, former Chief Secretary to the Treasury under Gordon Brown. Currently a Shadow Minister for the Digital Economy. But rumour has it that he may be running for Mayor of the West Midlands. Don't know if he's going to confirm that today. And Salma Yaqub is a broadcaster, activist, commentator. You've seen her beat people up on Question Time, not literally. She's a psychotherapist, she's an NHS manager, she's an anti-war activist, and she used to run a political party, I seem to remember, called Respect back in the day, which I'm sure is going to come up in the next hour as we chat. This is a panel about domestic injustices and what can politicians do, what can government do, what should they do in terms of philosophically but also practically, politically, economically. What can be done to solve some of the real pressing issues, some of which we've already heard today from our previous speakers. Before we go any further, we've been talking about social justice today. We haven't really defined our terms. So I just want to open with all three of you. What does social justice mean to you, and what kind of priority should it have in our politics? Liam.
So for me, it's why I'm here. It's why I joined the Labour Party when I was 15. And at the core of it is two ideas, really. So one is fairly sharing the goodness that we create together, the wealth we create together. And second is an ethical obligation on each of us to look after any of our neighbours who are in need. So that basic sense of ethical obligation and that right that we all have to share in the wealth that's created by society, for me, that's the kind of double helix of my politics.
Salma?
That's such a deep question, but really succinct. For me, it's speaking as a Muslim. It's about being true to fitra, the innate goodness in every human being, to fulfill our role, which is as custodians of this planet. So it's not about being tribalistic about the Muslim interest. So for me, it becomes, a person becomes political whether I like it or not, but it's very much part of my personal spiritual commitment, and it can be, I guess, summed up as treat others as you'd want to be treated yourself.
Okay. Owen, I think it's fair to say that Liam and Salma are on different parts of the left and you're on the right. How philosophically do you see social justice differently? Or maybe you don't. How would you define social justice as a Conservative?
Well, I think it's absolutely fundamental to conservatism. I grew up under the shadow of the Soviet Union. I remember going to China a month after the Gang of Four had fallen and seeing... I wasn't able to visit a town, actually, because there had been a famine riot the day before. And obviously I come from a different angle to Liam. I believe very, very strongly the absolute first role of government, because your title is what do politicians do, is to create the conditions that you can create wealth and jobs. That's absolutely fundamental. The most fundamental right we can give people is the right to have a job. That is absolutely vital. And with that, you can earn money, and then you can decide how to spend the money. And we had a wonderful example, second speaker, about how all the charitable functions you can perform. But if you don't create the wealth, and you don't have you guys creating the jobs, we don't get off base one. It's the most fundamental thing that can be done by a government.
And of course, it's interesting you say it's a key part of conservatism, but you would recognise, would you not, rightly or wrongly, there is a perception by a lot of people that social justice doesn't matter that much to the Conservatives. It's much more about making money or entrepreneurship or, you know, unleashing. Recently, in I think November last year, a UN rapporteur visited the UK, as you know, and he said about the austerity, he called it punitive, mean-spirited, and often callous. He said poverty in the UK is a political choice, and he said your government has inflicted great misery on the British people, especially the poor. That's a problem, even if you disagree with the substance, which I'm sure you do, and you could tell us why. Perceptionally, you recognise that's a problem for your party and government.
Yes, it's absolute total rubbish. We've created 1.5 million jobs. That's 1,000 jobs every day since 2010 when we came in. The country was flat bust. When we came in, we were borrowing £300,000 a minute. I know Liam won't like me reminding him, but he left a note at the Treasury saying, sorry, we've run out of money. It's not perfect now. We are still borrowing £50,000 a minute before we get too excited. But during that time, we have actually very gently allowed public spending to increase. So it's a very tricky balance, because what we have done effectively is to dump debt, not just on the current generation, but on our children and on our grandchildren. That is not moral, and that's not good. We can spend money on nice current things today, hospitals, schools, whatever it is, roads, welfare payments. The next generation won't. Our debt payments are over 50 billion. That's more than we spend on defence. So there's nothing moral about splurging huge amounts of public money and spending that money badly. So the UN gentleman, I think it was a lady actually.
No, it was a gentleman.
Was it?
Philip Alston.
Was sadly completely wrong.
So,
and you asked me about the Conservative attitude. I worked with Ian Duncan Smith when he was leader of the opposition. I remember very clearly, I have absolutely crystal clear memory. He went up to Glasgow and he came back. He'd been to an estate called Easterhouse, and he was just shocked at the conditions there. That you had young children, only went to school when volunteers went and got them out of their homes, their parents wrecked by drugs and alcohol, absolutely chronic unemployment, generation after generation after generation who had not worked, and he came back absolutely determined to correct that. And in fairness, he's come a long way, so he created the Centre for Social Justice, and that has effectively inspired conservative welfare thinking. And I think in fairness, I think Labour's gone along with a lot of it. And we've seen the results.
Liam, do you want to come in?
Well, I think what it inspired is universal credit, which has done more to drive people into food banks in this city than almost any other single policy. So that's the problem with visiting a place like Easterhouse and serving a place like Hodge Hill, which is the most income-deprived constituency in this country. And you can see, I see every day, my surgeries are full. The worst moment in my surgery this morning was having to review a letter from a National Health Service consultant who said to me, I cannot believe that your constituent has been stripped of personal independence payments. Whoever took this decision should be held to account. But that man is one of 32,000 disabled people in this city who have lost their benefit rights over the last couple of years.
Liam,
so actually the levels of poverty now...
I'll bring you back in a second.
The levels of poverty now are the most extreme, Owen, I have seen in 15 years.
I will let Owen respond in a moment. I will let Owen respond in one moment. Let's have one quick question for Liam. I mean, it's easy to get applause in Birmingham talking about social justice. The problem is, when you left government, you had a good child poverty record, but you had a pretty bad record on welfare in terms of penalising welfare claimants. You had a pretty bad record on inequality, which didn't really budge. Some studies showed it went up on your watch. Deregulation, the financial crash, which penalised so many people, all happened on your watch as well, didn't it?
So let's go through those three key
Very
things.
briefly.
So on welfare, we lift 1 million children out of poverty. Child poverty is now set to return to record levels. The financial crisis, yes, difficult, but actually the right thing to do was to stop what was a global recession becoming a global depression.
Okay,
that was the right thing to do.
That's after.
And actually on poverty, we were able to start getting kids into university, kids into apprenticeship, and restore. Social mobility began to move under Labour for the first time since the 1970s.
Hold on. I just heard you give a speech saying 27 of the richest people in the world control the same wealth as the poorest half. Tony Blair was asked multiple times, and he said he has no problem with people getting filthy rich. He said, it's not my desire to make Beckham poorer. I remember him saying.
He was wrong about that.
Okay.
Because the fight against inequality is the defining struggle for the Labour Party.
Sam, I will come to it. Owen, respond to that, and then we'll bring us on.
Well, Liam and I are inevitably going to go head-to-head on this.
You haven't heard from Salma yet.
You work for Gordon Brown. You had this huge splurge of money, tax credits, which got people hopelessly into debt, and it didn't work. It did not work. You left unemployment higher. Every Labour government...
There was a global depression.
Come on, Liam. You've had a 10-minute speech. Give us a chance.
So did you, Owen, but go on.
No, I haven't.
You were telling us about IDS's emotional trip to East House, if you remember. Carry on. Oh, you mean his speech. Sorry, apologies. Carry on.
Every Labour government has left unemployment higher than when it came in. And Gordon Brown... And they spent an absolute fortune. And I have no doubt whatever about the sincerity of what they tried to achieve. but it didn't work. I had people coming to my surgeries, obviously I can't talk about Hodge Hill, but I can talk about North Shropshire, people going to my surgeries complaining that if they worked 1 hour longer, they got hit by this benefit going, and that benefit going, and that benefit going. They're effectively whacked by a 96% rate of marginal tax. So what happened? They're perfectly sensible people. They didn't work. So effectively, what was happening under Labour, they were paying people not to work. The principle of universal credit has to be right. You work 1 hour longer, you will be better off. You work 2 hours longer, you will be better off. And a lot of people don't want to work full time. If they're young mothers, they want to get back above the 16 hours, 18, 19, 20, 21 hours.
Okay.
And I think what we will see, I'm fully aware, Liam, that all sorts of teething troubles with universal credit. Let's work on them, because the principle has to be right.
Okay, let's
that
bring in...
work is noble and right, and is the right...
Let's bring in Salma, who also hasn't had a speech yet, so let's Salma go.
Owen, your own colleague, Minister Amber Rudd, has said that universal credit isn't working. So I'm not even going to go there anymore. The reality on the ground is this. People are poorer now. The rich are richer and the poor are poorer. And we had all of this done in the name of austerity. One of the richest countries in the world has now got people going to food banks. I'm old enough to know a time when we didn't have that in Birmingham. I'm old enough to have walked through the city centre, and indeed it's not just the city centre, it's even in King's Heath, in Moseley, you'll see in every single ward, people homeless on the streets. A change has happened. And from my point of view, the Tories, of course, have been in power for a long time now. So please, you know, it's become beyond boring, quite frankly, to hear that it was because of a previous New Labour government. And I have my own criticisms of the previous New Labour regime. And for me, it was too close and too much of an appeasement of certain right-wing ideas. And I'm not here saying that everybody on the right is wrong. You know, there's a version of conservatism, one nation Toryism, which perhaps a lot of people here might even identify with. As with the right and the left, as in with faith, you will get spectrums of opinion. So we don't need to overly characterize or stereotype. Okay. But let's not stray away from realities. And right now, what we have got is a situation, and forgive me if this sounds a bit crude, we have had decades and decades of generally pale, stale males representing our country. And because they talk, and I've learnt this, because they talk slowly and in a certain accent, we assume that they know what they're talking about. And everybody else has got locked out. We talked about the kids. The kids in this city marched against the Iraq war. Thousands of them walked out of school. They were told off about it at the time. And guess what? They were right. The Labour leadership at the time under Tony Blair was wrong. The Tory party, which wholeheartedly supported all of those interventions, was wrong. The kids of Birmingham were right. And they're right on climate change. Again, they've been let down.
I'm interested that, I don't know if you spotted it, but Liam was nodding through a lot of your answers, which I thought was interesting. Let me ask you this, Liam. Yeah. I don't want to re-prosecute the 2010 and 2015 general elections, but since Owen has made a very strong point about the situation you left behind, and given you did write that note, do you feel some kind of regret for handing your opponents this political stick with which to beat Labour and the left for the last 9 years?
Every day. I mean, look, I was naive to honour what was a tradition in the Treasury that dates back to Churchill. So every Chief Secretary has left that note. Only one person has ever revealed the contents, and that was my successor, David Laws.
To be fair, a Liberal Democrat, not a Tory.
Exactly. He then once told me a story. We've sort of slightly made up now. And he told me a story. He said, Liam, if it's any consolation, David Cameron took that note to my constituency, waved it around, and I lost my seat. So he is no longer in politics. So there is a kind of justice. But the point was, we had to stop a global recession becoming a Great Depression. The banking crisis did start on Wall Street. It started when the Glass-Steagall Act was repealed by Bill Clinton, and you had these banks that grew to become bigger than countries. Weren't just banks in our country that were knocked over. Banks in 27 countries were knocked over. And, you know, you won't hear this from many Conservative politicians now, but actually George Osborne backed Labour spending plans right up to November 2000.
Okay, now we're getting into too much familiar weird. I remember all this from 9 years ago. So let me just move on. Let me just get into some philosophical question.
Yeah.
I mean, Owen talked about, you know, the role of government. What is the role of government for you as a Labour politician? What is the right balance between governments fighting for social justice, societies fighting for social justice, individuals fighting for social justice? Where does that balance for you?
So I think the key task in politics today is to democratise the way that wealth is shared. And that means two things, basically. It means that government has to protect and enhance the right of everyone to earn a good life. And second, we have to organise the way that we share wealth and look after each other. If you get that basic right and responsibility right, then wealth will get shared. At the moment, the global marketplace that's been created in the 30 years, since the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, the global marketplace has given birth to these, what I've called technopolies, the biggest firms on earth, absolute giants. And they don't work effectively to spread the wealth. They work to throw wealth up to the top 1%. And that's why the top 1% now owns as much as 3.7 billion. And if that trend continues by 2030, that 1% will own 200 trillion pounds. So it's partly about making sure that we can earn a good life. It's partly about our moral obligations to each other to look after each other and make sure our neighbours are safe.
Somewhat big government is a phrase often used by the right to talk about the left. There is a point where government is too intrusive and too oppressive and taking over the responsibilities. Where does that come for you? What's the right balance? I'm based in the US right now where it's a very different mode. The debate is very different. Even conservatives in the UK would look at the US and say we won't go as far as the Republican Party in terms of shrinking the government. And Bernie Sanders comes along and says we should be more like the Europeans. What's the balance for you?
Well, I always find it quite ironic when conservative politicians talk about small government, personal responsibility, and the government getting out of the way. A nice idea, except when it comes to subsidising certain sections of the population, they're quite happy. They're quite happy to use public money for that. In fact, to secure the system, they use governments, both nationally and internationally. So it's not accidental that Saudi Arabia, which was brought up in the last panel, has twice the number of British warplanes than our own RAF. It's because of government deals. £5 billion worth of arms from our country. It's not an accident that when it came to the bailout, the banks, when they were making the money and huge profits were made, you know, we've got all of those stereotypes of those London bankers, that was a polite term, by the way, that nobody was worried about the profits. But when it came to the crash, they weren't made to pay the price. If you were truly conservative, right, your business fails, that's capitalism. That's the rooting out. But guess what? When it was their mates, their businesses were not allowed to fail. It was public money which bailed them out, trillions of pounds. And actually that could have been used for the wider population, and we could have made conditions on the banks, if you know they had to be saved, to have made sure that certain investments happened. That did not happen. So they privatised profits and they socialised risk.
Okay.
That's the inverse conservatism.
What do you favour, briefly, because I want to move on and bring Owen back in.
I think there's a balance between personal responsibility, having personal freedom, having dignity to be able to live the life that you want, and while you work hard, that should be rewarded. Under this government, more people are in work. Yes, there may be the job figures, but I am working in the NHS Trust where nurses working a full-time job still have to resort to the indignity of food banks because the wages are not enough. That is something which is morally, economically,
so let me bring Owen back in. As I said, I don't want to re-prosecute previous general elections. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, and I don't assume this, but let's assume that you're right about the debt and the deficit and austerity and the reasons for it all. Let's give that. Even then, when you look at 9 years Tory Prime Minister has been in office, and you look at the record, when you see the food bank, we've heard about food banks, so when you see 13% increase in food bank use, the highest on record, when you see 14 million people living in poverty, 4.5 million kids, I think it is, 9 years into your government, surely you must think, okay, this is bad, regardless of the justifications I have in my mind for it. The results are bad.
No, it's improving. We have made massive improvements.
Hold on. Hold on, before you jump ahead. 13. No, before you jump ahead, sorry. 13% increase in Trussell Trust, the largest food bank provider in the country, says 13% increase year on year, the highest on record. Yeah, that is not improvement.
Okay, let me come to that. Do not underestimate the value of 1,000 people a day getting real jobs, earning real money.
Zero contract.
No, that's absolute rubbish. About 80% are on full-time. The zero contract is really a tiny fraction. That's absolute nonsense. That is of real value. That is generating real wealth, which can be ploughed back.
But Owen, I'm willing to concede all this. You've created lots of jobs. Okay. There's higher incomes for certain people. Okay. But what about the downside? I don't hear a word from you about that.
I'm coming to that.
Okay.
Universal credit, which is only just been introduced. It's the biggest change since Beveridge, which Liam mentioned. Is going to get 250,000 people back into jobs. That is enormous. That is an enormous benefit to people that prior to that were just dumped on benefits, costing hard-working families. Every family was paying £8,300 for other people to be on benefits. That was not a good way of families using their money and having to do it through the state as well. When you come to food banks, they are not a unique UK phenomenon. There are food banks, sadly, in Germany and in Canada, and we have seen an increase.
Why?
I think partly because they are much more obviously available, because job centres tell people. I think it is, hang on, no, you asked the question. It is partly because the whole concept of universal credit is you treat people as if they manage their finances as if they were in employment. So they got paid at the end of the month. We all get paid at the month. I expect most people in this room get paid at the end of the month. And there has been definitely a problem with people not being able to manage. And don't forget, you're talking about people who've been on benefits for decades, some of them. No, so hang on, this is a really important point. So what is possible under universal credit is to have an advance. And these, as I see it, are the teething troubles which we have to work through. So and what we're seeing with food banks, they are flushing out an underlying problem which was there always before, but we had people just parked on benefits at huge expense.
But Owen, hold on. Let's just deal with some facts here. On your government's watch, there's been a statistically significant rise in infant mortality across Britain, the first for 100 years, and no other European country has seen an increase in infant mortality. According to the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, infant mortality in the UK is expected to be 140% higher than 15 other European countries by 2030. I mean, these are doctors, public health experts. They're not making this stuff up.
No, but we have also seen a very significant increase in the population. You mentioned housing.
No other European country has seen a significant rise in infant mortality.
No, this is part of the problem. And what we have to do is to manage that, because this appalling problem which Liam talked about, the people sleeping on the streets, which is completely ghastly. It is because we are not managing the people coming to this country. I mean, one of the major housing charities says we need to build a new home every 2 minutes.
Hold on, just to be clear, you're saying the rise in infant mortality in the UK is the fault of immigrants?
No, I'm saying there is huge pressure on our public services. Okay. There's no doubt about it.
Okay, let Salma respond.
Thank you, because I'm so glad you said that. So everyone here can hear the logic that's been put out. And that's why to try to insinuate, well, you didn't insinuate, you said it, so fair play to you. You were very honest about it. Your opinion is that the rising population is causing pressures on public services, right?
The reality, on health, education, transport, right across the board.
The reality is the falling population in this country, in terms of demographics, means that we've got real problems ahead. We actually need more, not less immigration. That's what on the economic side. Politically, that's very difficult to say because the climate that, I'm sorry to say, your party has created, where, because of the politics and the state policies, the government policies that have been carried out under your government, the failure of those of letting down people white people, working class people, brown people, Asian people, women, the disabled, all of these hard-working people who are not afforded a living wage. It's very easy to scapegoat other people. And that is the real danger that's happening. At times of economic insecurity, what the powerful people do is always have another. In the last century, it was the Jewish people. If you look at the Daily Mail headlines from exactly a century ago, it was about those Jewish immigrants, ruining our way of life and taking our jobs and houses. Then it was black people coming, and in Birmingham, the Irish got it. And I say to our Muslim brothers and sisters, don't take it personally, because we're on the firing line at the moment. And let's not fall for it. The reason we've got extra poverty right now is because of the political choices this government made. The lack of investment isn't because they haven't got money. When they wanted to get 10 votes from the DUP, they found £1 billion. Now when they want to persuade certain poorer towns, we're suddenly told we can find money. They never said we don't have enough money for wars abroad. We're the 6th richest country in the world. We can subsidise the rich, but we're not willing to
let Owen respond briefly, then I need to ask Liam something. Briefly, Owen.
It's a simple fact that the leading housing charities say that if we go on at the current rate of immigration, about 300,000 a year, we need to build a new home every 2 minutes. We have an extraordinary record in this country of welcoming people from oppression, from difficult economic difficulties for centuries. But there is absolutely clear evidence there is pressure on public subsidies.
But Owen, hold on. But you keep saying you're selectively picking your stats.
I'm not blaming anyone.
Let me ask you this question. Hold on, Salma, 1 second. The Institute for Fiscal Studies.
We need to build more housing.
The Institute.
Thomas, absolutely right. We obviously need to build more.
Okay, so you all agree on that. But Institute for Fiscal Studies says that the number of kids living in poverty in this country is going to go up by 1 million over the next 5 years. Are they all immigrants as well?
No, because we're creating jobs, and they will also create jobs. And we want to manage our immigration because we need skilled people.
I'm not even talking about immigration. The IFS is not talking about immigration. They said 1 million kids, British kids, are going to be living in poverty over the next 5 years. Extra 1 million kids.
Well, I think that's nonsense. When you look at
the Institute of Fiscal Studies is nonsense.
When you look at the record of creating wealth and jobs, you have wages growing at the moment, and we have significant job creation.
Liam, do you want to respond?
Carry on.
I'm the grandson of Irish immigrants. So when my granddad came here from the bogs of Ireland in the decades ago, you still had the signs up that said no blacks, no dogs, and no Irish. Let me tell you what he taught me. He taught me that newcomers to this country work every hour God sends, and they pay in. And the problems we have as a country today are not because people from East Europe are only paid £8.73 in an Amazon warehouse in Rugeley. The problems we have today is because those at the very top are allowed to get away without paying their taxes.
But again, Liam, I'm glad. I'm sure a lot of people are glad to hear you say that. But again, you were in a government that didn't say this all the time. That actually did. I'm old enough to remember Tony Blair and asylum vouchers. Do you remember the vouchers that demonised asylum seekers? I'm old enough to remember Phil Wallace running the most racist campaign for re-election in older. I mean, that was part of the Labour record as well.
But look, Labour got many things wrong in office.
Okay, good. I just want to hear you say that.
No, we got many things wrong in office. But look, we tried to govern in a way that shared opportunity in new ways. And if we'd continued with that basic economic philosophy, we would be richer and fairer.
Okay.
We would not have food banks, and we would not have people like Kane Walker dying on our streets.
So here's a question for you. Presumably you agree with the UN rapporteur and what he said.
We gave evidence.
Okay, and you agree with the IFS prediction that you're looking at nearly 1 million kids in poverty in the next 5 years?
I see no reason to doubt those numbers.
So you're looking at some of that, and you look at the food bank stuff. Yeah. Given all of that, and I come here as someone who hasn't lived here for 4 years, and I come in to see family, friends, work. I come in, why aren't Labour leading in the polls then? Why aren't they battering this Tory government if things are so bad?
For two reasons. So one, Brexit is a divisive issue. Two...
By the way, we managed to get this far without saying Brexit.
Yeah. Brexit is almost like a kind of an overlay on politics, and it divides Labour voters and it divides Conservative voters. You know, as it happens, I am absolutely convinced that, you know, no matter how long it takes, the generation coming through is absolutely going to be taking us back into Europe at some point over the next 10 years. I don't know how long it will take, but it is going to happen for sure. Second, we've got to realise that there are people on both the far left and on the far right who are using strategic extremism to try and divide and rule. I'm someone who lost a friend on the streets of their constituency, murdered by a neo-Nazi. National action and the forces behind that murder are stronger in this country than they are almost anywhere else on earth. There are people who are weaponizing social media in order to divide us like never before.
So given
and actually, that's why we have to work much harder to come together and find that common cause for common sense.
Given you've mentioned the weaponizing of social media and division, and given Salma mentioned as well some of these social issues, social justice is not just about putting food on the table and money. It's also about opportunity for all. It's about equality.
And living well together.
For minority communities, social justice is about protection from racism, from discrimination. You have a party now which lost, I think, 8 MPs last week or the week before last to the independent group. One of the reasons they cited for leaving, many of them friends of yours, I'm assuming, was anti-Semitism in your party. Luciana Berger faced horrific threats and discrimination online, and I believe in real life as well. What's your response as a Labour politician when you see former colleagues who were once colleagues who are saying, this is why we can't be part of the Labour Party?
Look, I lost an uncle my uncle was in the Danish resistance, and he died as part of the work of the Danish resistance, ferrying 4,500 Jews out of Denmark. And when you go to Yad Vashem and you look at the memorial to the righteous, it is absolutely heartbreaking. So there can be no space for anti-Semitism, just as there is no space for Islamophobia in British politics. And if there is an inch of doubt, we have to turn over every stone and do whatever is necessary to eradicate those evils.
But you accept Labour came late to this party on this issue?
I just don't think we've been fast enough. And sometimes, in public life, the scale and the speed of the response is not up to the task. And so that's what I fear has happened here. If we're to build that kind of common cause through politics, then we have to take the discrimination away.
Salma, you've been one of the most prominent campaigners against Islamophobia since as long as I can remember, since the Iraq War, 9/11. Right now, when you see discussions about anti-Semitism on the left, for Jewish communities in the country, that's a social justice issue. That's a social injustice issue. What is your response? Especially because you were in Respect, with George Galloway, who said some pretty crazy stuff on this subject in recent days. So when people talk about anti-Semitism on the left, they're also talking about, especially about that far left, as Liam just said. What's your response?
A couple of things. Yes, whilst I talked about Islamophobia, I am proud that I talked about prejudice faced by all parts of the community. So no, I happen to be a Muslim woman, and yes, I'm visibly Muslim, but the whole point of Respect was about social justice for everybody. So it's a kind of a mischaracterization to kind of make out Respect was, just about one section of the population. And as far as anti-Semitism goes, I mentioned before that in the last century, it's to Europe's shame that it was the scapegoating. Again, economically, there was depression that was happening, insecure times, political leadership had let people down, and the other at that time were the Jews. And the fact is 6 million Jews were exterminated in a so-called civilized area of the world. And I am not surprised, and I stand in solidarity with our Jewish brothers and sisters when it comes down to the fear and need to make sure that that kind of vile racism and that demonizing of their community cannot be repeated.
We all agree on that, but you don't deny that it exists.
Because words lead to murder. And it's not so, and again, it's Europe, right? In Europe, just in 20 years, in my lifetime, we've seen the genocide of Muslims in Europe, in Bosnia. And we don't hear about that very often. And I would say right now, with the geopolitical situation being what it is, you cannot deny Muslims are definitely
and I'm going to come to that before we go to the audience in a moment.
So for me, it's not either or. Whether it's racism against black people, whether
I get it's not either or, but the accusation is that the far left has a problem with anti-Semitism. It's not. They're not accused. Far left's not accused of having an Islamophobia problem.
Do I think the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn is institutionally racist? No.
Do you think it had a problem with anti-Semitism?
Do I think that Jeremy Corbyn is a racist? No. In fact, he's one of the greatest anti-racist organisers. So when weaponise.
But you didn't answer my
any
question,
form.
but do you accept there's been a genuine problem with anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, or do you not accept that?
Now, I think that any action to root out racism, to root out anti-racism, and to confront it head-on is absolutely validated and should be supported.
Oh, and before I go...
But at the same time, do not devalue the issue by allowing people, whether it's Muslims, when it comes to Tories, there's Islamophobia problem,
So
but they weaponize it in a different way.
Okay.
I believe that we have to be very, very careful to not weaponize it and use it as an agenda for something else.
Okay, before I go to the audience, I want to come in, briefly, Owen, and then I need to ask you a question.
I was interested in comments on extremism. I remember the days when the National Front was a really horrible, powerful force. I mean, they have gone, I think, in fairness to both the main parties, Labour Party and the Conservative Party. I think inter-community relations are far better than we could have hoped for.
That's not what the statistics show, though.
No, I think,
hate crimes have doubled in the last 5 years.
I know.
The number of far-right people being referred to prevent has gone up.
Well, just let me finish the sentence. We have a very varied population, and broadly, you could pick up these instances. I think relations are really good. It's something to be proud of, the society we've built. I really do. But I do find it completely extraordinary, this amazing revival of anti-Semitism. I find it absolutely weird.
So let me ask. And it's a problem in the Labour Party. It's not a problem in the Conservative Party.
No.
Okay, so what is a problem with the Conservative Party is Islamophobia. It's a huge problem in your party.
No.
Your former chair, Baroness Varsi, who was one of the most senior Muslims in your party, says Islamophobia is, quote, widespread in the Conservative Party. It exists right from the grassroots all the way up to the top. She's called for an independent inquiry. So has the Conservative Muslim Forum, which has also said your party has failed to take action on the issue of Islamophobia. Why won't you have an inquiry into all these cases we're seeing of Islamophobia in the Tory party that has been identified by Muslim Tories?
Well, I was in government side. I was generally surprised when she said that, because I really don't see this. The Tory party is a completely open party.
How is that different to a Labour politician saying, I don't see anti-Semitism? Yeah. And Jewish people say, but we're Jews, we see it. Well, Muslims see it. Muslim activists in your party, forget Sayeeda Varsi, the Conservative Muslim Forum says your party's failed to take action on Islamophobia.
Well, if someone send me some examples of that, I'd very happy to pass them on to the party chairman. But we know
the party chairman has got them. Brandon Lewis has been told
very graphic examples of anti-Semitism recently in the Labour Party,
and also in the Conservative Party. I mean, go on, give an example.
I'd love to hear your actual examples. Please do share them.
Well, it's an amazing thing at Diane Abbott's meeting a couple of nights ago. They refused to pass a motion.
Sorry, explain that.
Well, it's all in the papers today. The fact is...
No, you sounded very confident about the racism in the Labour Party. Well, I would love to hear you give me an example of the Labour Party.
Well, look at any newspaper for the last 6 months.
All right, okay. But there have been plenty of cases of Islamophobia and Muslim politicians raising it. But you're saying there's no problem with Islamophobia in the Tory party, even though Muslims in the Tory party are saying there's a problem with Islamophobia. I
think my broader point is that together we have built a very varied society where broadly
I wasn't disputing that
relations are very good, and should we
and I'm sure Jeremy Corbyn agrees with you on that. The point is, you wouldn't give him you would say he's still got a problem with anti-Semitism. I'm saying many would argue the Tory party has an issue with Islamophobia, but you're not agreeing. That's fine. Let's go to the audience and let's take some questions. We'll take them in threes. Lady there in the green headscarf, standing up. You want to wait for the microphone to come to you. Then we'll take. Try to take two people I haven't asked before. Lady at the back there. Should
I stand up? Okay, I'd like to put this question to Liam, Salma and yourself, Mehdi.
Okay. Rita answering questions.
I think recently with what's happening within the local schools within inner city Birmingham, the No Outsiders campaign, I feel that's an injustice where it seems like Muslims are being pitted against the LGBT community. And as someone who's worked in the arts as far back as the early 90s, and I don't feel it's a religious issue. And I think when I look at Muslim history, we've never really burnt. Muslims have given privacy to people from all backgrounds, and it's almost like we've been the ones that have been burning the LGBT at the stakes. So how do we look at this issue? Thanks.
Hi, my question is just for the Conservative Party in general. I feel like it's important to separate anti-Semitism with anti-Israeli, but also I just wanted to ask, why is no one talking about the concentration camps in China, where there's millions of Muslims being put in concentration camps?
And gentleman who was behind this pillar? I can't see him. I can't see him. I don't know if he's put on a headscarf since we last saw him.
Yeah, I'll put on that headscarf.
You spotted him somehow.
Sure. All right, I've got a question for Owen Paterson, please. If Liam Byrne said that there wasn't a problem with anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, he would be immediately suspended. You just said that there isn't a problem with Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. Why should you not be suspended?
You respond to that?
To those two.
Yeah, you could respond to whatever you like.
Yeah, I'll give you a completely honest answer. If you can give me some examples, I'll pass them on to the party chairman.
I'll give you an example.
I'm quite generally
I'll give you an example.
So
yesterday, I'll give you an example. There's a Facebook group that was identified yesterday, run by a Tory councillor and a former Tory councillor, called Boris Johnson Supporters Group. In this Facebook group, there are horrific remarks made about blowing up Muslims and blowing up mosques. Will you take that to the party chairman?
Of course I will. It's the first I've heard of it.
It's all over Twitter. It's all over Twitter for the last 48 hours.
I've been here all day.
Okay.
Can I answer the other question? The other lady at the back.
Hold on, let Owen finish.
A really interesting point. You're quite right. First of all, there is this muddle between being anti-Semitic and anti-Israel, because the two are not absolutely identified. But I think the point about these camps in China is very interesting. And there's not very much been written about that. And it's let the light in on them. Get the information out, get the world to know about them, and that will put pressure on governments. But I think you make a very interesting point about it. There's been very little publicity about that.
Can I just give actually a concrete example of Islamophobia from quite prominent Tories? And I would really love it if you'd not only take it back to Brandon Lewis, but actually ask for an independent inquiry.
Go on, just one, time is short.
Sean Bailey, who is currently the Conservative candidate for mayor, pretty prominent, you'd say. He has publicly, on his Twitter, had these words. Make sure that I get this right. He's referred to the fact that we have Muslims and Hindus are being attacked by Sean Bailey in this. Their presence is causing a cesspit of crime. So that's one. In another one, he said, Christians make better Britons. Therefore, that's against a lot of people, right? That's just really fundamental.
Okay.
And that's with that. And he's also tweeted something where it says, he referred to Sadiq Khan, who happened to be a Muslim and is a mayor of London, as the mad mullah of Londonistan.
He didn't say that. He retweeted it.
He retweeted it.
Okay, yeah.
But again, you tell me if a Muslim.
Okay, so Owen's got it. Owen's going to take Sean Bailey back to Brandon Lewis and ask about these comments.
So that's specific.
And the Facebook page.
If you send them to me, I'll pass them on.
Okay. And the problem of passing it on, though, is anything going to happen? Is anything going to happen?
But will you?
Boris Johnson said Muslim women in veils look like bank robbers and was cleared.
I'm a backbench MP. I'll pass it on to the chairman.
You're an influential backbencher. You're a former cabinet minister. Okay, no, hold on. We have to answer the question for the audience.
Independent inquiry. It'd be great. You come to Birmingham, and you know what? I do applaud Owen for being here. We can disagree on a lot of things, but this is what democracy looks like, where we can engage, have dialogue, debate.
Okay, we're going to go back to the audience.
And hopefully influence each other. Please, I do want to ask.
Go on, briefly.
Will you support the call? I'm not saying you have to carry it out, but at least support the call for an independent inquiry into Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. Just support it.
Okay, I'll look you straight in the eye. I am most surprised by what you're saying. I have not had any cases.
But will you support? I'm not asking that.
No,
will you support a call? No.
Sounds like a lot of Labour MPs for the last 2 years. Okay, let's. We got to.
The answer is to send them on.
Yes. Yeah. The question about. Go on, Liam. Do you want to jump in there, and then I'm going to get Salman.
Just super quickly. So, this is always going to be a hot topic. It's really important that parents are absolutely part of the process, consulted all the way to make sure that relationship education is, one, age appropriate, and two, the protected characteristics under the Equalities Act are taught in a balanced way. So no one is privileged above another, including the faith background of people, both children and parents. Now, the challenge that you're referring to has been triggered by a school that did, when it put the programme together, a lot of consultation with parents, but then stopped it 4 years ago. And this, I have to say, is the nightmare of the academy system today. So to resolve an issue in my... If this was a local authority school, I'd had the 2 cabinet members for community cohesion and education outside the school gates, and I wouldn't have let them go until the problem was sorted. Now, I literally have to ring the Secretary of State's office every day to try and find out what they're doing to bring peace back to our streets.
Just to broaden it out a bit. You, as I said, you were in Respect. You worked in left-wing circles with left-wing activists. You know very well that there is a tension between a lot of conservative Muslims in the British Muslim community who have an issue with LGBT-related issues, same-sex marriage, etc., and of course, people on the liberal left who see this as a very important human rights struggle. How did you resolve those tensions, or did you ever have to? Just wondering.
Of course, even now, that's a whole other question. I feel it's rather...
That's what I do. I ask whole other questions.
About me. In my journey in politics, and I had death threats from our Muslim brothers, some of them, who thought, I'm a kafir because I'm supporting democracy and that goes against Islam, their version of it. And, that means I must be some kind of, overly promiscuous woman because I'm seen out and about in public and my voice is being heard. I didn't think it was that nice, but still. So I've had it from that end, of course, and I've had death threats from the far right. So there'll be the wackos and the extremists in all sections. But at the same time, and there were certain sections of the left who had a problem with me being part of it. I remember I went as a British representative of the UK anti-war movement to France. And we had the European Social Forum.
They loved you in France.
And it was a hall like this. In fact, it was slightly even bigger. And a lady who happened to be sharing a platform banged her hands on the panel and said, I refuse to share a platform with this woman because she is oppressing every woman in this hall because I happen to wear a scarf. Right? And in France, in the anti-war demos, they made Muslims march behind everybody else. So, this is an issue on the right and the left, just like anti-Semitism, is an issue that has been in the left and in the right. So I hope that answers your question there. But coming to the question that was raised by the sister in the audience, I think it's heartbreaking when groups who have been vilified and discriminated themselves are pitted against each other. And for me, my moral, my spiritual, my political fight is to say we have to unite. Do not allow ourselves to get divided.
Well said.
And actually, I do want to congratulate Liam because he did wade in on this. And he did call for a sensible dialogue, and he did say that the school should go back and look at the materials on the grounds of being able to question, is it age appropriate? And the Muslim community, but what worries me about this agenda is actually it's been done as a de-radicalisation agenda. I've looked at the teachers' notes. They are justifying teaching reception children to make sure they're de-radicalised by talking about LGBT issues. And I have LGBT friends who feel they're being exploited by having this kind of promoted in this way.
We're running out of time. I'm going to take 3 more questions very quickly, 3 brief answers from our panellists. People who haven't asked before. Lady here at the front, gentleman at the back. Anyone on this side that I can't?
What would you say to immigrants who vote Conservative after hearing some of the comments we heard from our Conservative representative?
Gentleman there at the back.
This is a question for the Conservative MP. I would ask, why do you and throughout this debate, and the Conservative Party in particular, seem to have an aversion to simple, plain facts? Because I've got up on my phone here, I can come and show you if you want, a report by The Guardian saying 4 million British workers living poverty. Not 4 million Britons, 4 million British workers. So your statements about job creation and job creation solving everything is clearly not working. And you talk about people being incentivised to work. Why would people be incentivised to work if they're still going to live in poverty?
Okay, and then the gentleman up there. You want to wait for the mic? Just shout it out. Go on, shout it.
When it comes to poverty, and apart from building more houses, what would you say are the solutions? Because you hear a lot of kind of like...
Okay. Good question. Good question. Okay, so let's start with that. If you were Chancellor of the Exchequer and you could wave your wand and do one policy to improve social justice in the UK, what would it be?
No, it's not one policy.
Oh,
so,
politicians.
Future Job Fund, transform mental health services, revolutionise technical education, and give us the same spending on infrastructure as they have in London.
Salma?
There's a long answer, but I'll give you the short answer. Move Parliament to Birmingham. So that colleagues like Owen
that comes with a lot of disagreeing people, you know.
It's about empathy, bottom line. You know, when people are in their own bubbles, whether it's class or whether it's race or whether it's faith, that empathy seems to go.
Okay.
And I think and actually, there
I'm
is
sure
a
the Mancunians and Liverpudlians would
divide.
have a view as well.
Yeah,
on
but
where
at least
that
it'd be nearer.
Parliament should be. Oh, and what would you do? One policy, ideally, or two?
Well, just to remind someone, the first parliaments were held in Shropshire. It's a very regrettable tendency they've been in London ever since. I'm very happy to move them back.
Okay.
Well,
everyone wants it in their patch. Everyone.
Birmingham,
Okay. Social justice. That hasn't been done that you'd like to see done.
Continue what we're doing to make it as easy as possible to create jobs, as we have done, because do not underestimate the social value of getting people into jobs.
But millions of people live in in-work poverty. As the gentleman of that, to merge with that question, you recognise that, right? That's a fact.
No, wages are going up.
No, hold on.
The value of wages are going
Hold
up.
on. You know that millions of people live in in-work poverty. You've heard that phrase. You're a former cabinet minister.
These are all subjective. You look at the House of Commons library analysis, the IFS, the poverty levels are pretty well steady where they were before. So
that's your achievement. So hold on. Even if that were the case, 9 years into your government, poverty is the same as we found it.
Come on, you didn't interrupt the others. We are now seeing wealth increasing. Wealth is actually going up.
So
what I agree with Liam is on technical education, because you no longer join a firm and say for life.
By the way,
you're changing jobs. And I think the lady asked, if I quickly pick up the two, we have a fantastic record in this country going back centuries of welcoming people, but we've always managed it. That's all I am saying. And we have now not had control of the numbers, and we are seeing very obvious pressures on our public services. That's what I said. It's absolute common sense.
So
we just want to manage. We want to open the whole country to the whole world. We don't have to restrict it to the European Union once we've had Brexit. So we can welcome the most talented people from all around the world. But we have to manage the numbers.
We've got to wrap up.
When the housing charities say you have to build a home every 2 minutes, it is screamly obvious to everyone in this room that we can't cope with that.
Housing charities say a lot else about your
public services at the same speed.
I've got to ask you, just so you don't feel like you're being ganged up on by lefties. Heidi Allen, until last week, was a Conservative MP. She ditched your party and said, quote, "I can no longer represent a government and a party who can't open its eyes to the suffering endured by the most vulnerable in society, suffering that we have the power to fix." What do you say to her? Colleague of yours for the last 3-4 years.
I'm saying that we are pushing on with our policies, which have, and I would go back to the beginning, the most appalling damage was done to our economy by dumping people on welfare and giving no hope for the future. Everybody now has a real chance of getting a job. Universal Credit is going to get 250,000 people back into jobs. People coming to my surgery now know that if they work 1 hour longer, they will be better off. They're not hit by 96% rate of tax. That is a good thing, and that is a moral thing. And endlessly spending money, where we borrowed large amounts of money, and dumping the debt on our children and our grandchildren is immoral. That is wrong, and that is bad.
Okay, last word. Liam Byrne, are you running for mayor of the West Midlands?
So I'm going to think about it, and I'm going to talk to a lot of my colleagues in West Midlands Labour, and the conclusion that I think we're going to want to get to between us as a movement is we have to make sure that whoever we put up is the best person to beat Andy Street, because we've got a Conservative mayor right now and things are getting worse, they're not getting better.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap it up. Give a big thanks to Liam Byrne, Salma Yaqub, and especially Owen Paterson for coming into the... Thank you. Thanks all very much to this panel.